Header Footer Gallery and this podcast are part of the New Media Caucus, an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars. Recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving, we support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution in the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership, to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address, both within the caucus and in our field. Welcome everyone to the 13th episode of our third season of Header Footer Presents. I'm your host, Constanza. In this episode of Icebreaker, we will be talking with Dylan Diego Bradbury and Oliver Jonas, founders of Audiospaces. So thank you everyone for coming here today. Thank you. Yes. It's been a long time coming, I wanted you to be on this podcast for a very long time. So you can have our, listeners listen in or tune into what you've been up to with Audiospaces. But before we start that, I want to just read a little bit about their bios and then we can get started, okay? So Dylan is from London and is co-founder of Audiospaces. He tends to focus more on the project's written output, curation, and research. Apart from spending his time playing with unorthodox field recordings, he recently completed a PhD in Latin American cultural studies, which involved 2 years of fieldwork in Argentina. From his academic interest, Dylan comes at Audiospaces, especially thinking about sound maps and archives, media technologies in general, as well as cultures of everyday listening. As he sometimes talks about it in the project newsletter, Audiospaces also speaks to a long-held interest in experimenting with sound, listening to the world with other people, and using the internet for things beyond suffering on social media. Oliver is a co-founder of Audiospaces. He initially built Audiospaces over 2 years ago to explore geolocated sound as a journaling tool and remains primarily interested in sound as a medium for memory and other ways we relate to sound. Oliver continues to develop the platform to make field recording and sonic archives more accessible. Awesome. So I guess let's start with, how did you meet? And what can you tell us about Audiospaces for the listeners that do not know what it is?
Yeah. Oliver, do you want to explain how we met?
I do indeed. Firstly, thanks for having us on the podcast, Constanza.
Of course.
Now, how we met at a music festival in the north of Italy. It's a good festival. What's the name of the festival? Do you remember the name of it?
It was Terra.
Mm-hmm.
It was a few years ago now, but I'd had some conversations back in London about images and the prevalence of images in society and how people capture most of their memories through images. And it was sort of, they were naive conversations, I think, now, having met Dylan and spoken to him for a few years. But fundamentally, the idea of using sound as that medium for memory and to capture moments that we might not otherwise capture, and also then how we relate to those memories differently from visual ones and photographs, was something that I came into this festival quite interested in. And then I met Dylan, and it was like Dylan had all of the research and all the knowledge and the context to put this topic into, to give it a frame. So we got talking during the festival, and I think we sort of left it. Afterwards, we didn't speak for a while. I had been learning to program in the background, and it was only really how long afterwards? Maybe it was a year later.
Yeah, almost a year later, I think. Yeah.
I reached out to Dylan. I'd been building it quietly just to see if I could do it before promising too much to Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
And I had something that sort of worked, and I had started to use. I reached out to him just to say, look, here's this tool. What do you think about it? How does this fit into, is this what you were imagining when we first discussed it? And slowly, neither of us are experts in building an app or a platform.
Hmm.
But it's an interest in that initial idea, and the context that Dylan's been able to give it that has then turned it into this platform for more people to record and pin sounds to a map, to build maps collaboratively, and to explore themselves and others through sound. And that's the simple version of what Audio Spaces is. It is quite simple, really.
Yeah.
I think it's very appropriate that you met each other at a music festival. Just, speaking of, the type of work that you do and just recording sounds, right, and the app development as well. What was your first impression of Oliver, Dylan? I'm curious to know what drew you to Dylan, to Oliver and starting this project together.
Yeah, I mean, it was very like, for me, it was very serendipitous at the time because I was preparing my field work I was going to Argentina to do field work, which is kind of tangentially related to field recording. And I was getting quite interested in sound archives and sound maps, just as a sort of kind of genre of technology,
Hmm.
which has been emerging for the last it's kind of emerged already for the last like 2 decades. And it was kind of in the middle of like after having a couple of beers and just sitting in the sun in Italy, Oliver says, "Oh, I've got this idea," like kind of saying it in a way which I hadn't really read about, kind of saying it in a way which I hadn't really kind of thought about in the same way, which is like a way of documenting your memories through sound,
Hmm.
kind of as an alternative, as Oliver says, an alternative to kind of visual media, which is very different from the way I learnt about sound maps, which was very much from a kind of like conventional history of sound art, and acoustic ecology, and arriving eventually at using the technology to build these sound maps. So it was like an interesting, yeah, it was very kind of, it sparked a lot of ideas in my head. But I'm basically illiterate in programming, so it was like an interesting idea. But then I was like, okay, we'll leave it and see what Oliver comes up with. And I had basically forgotten about it. I went to Argentina. I was living in the south of Argentina, kind of busy with my own stuff. And then Oliver messages me and just says, "Do you remember that map thing we talked about?" Well, I made it. And it was really good. It was like, even that first version was really good. And there were already some interesting sounds because I think Oliver was sharing it with like his friends. We've got a lot of mutual friends who are artists and musicians. And so there's a lot of kind of interesting kind of experiments with sounds.
Hmm.
So we kind of have there's a lot of crossovers in our interests, and it's very fortunate that I'm willing to spend a lot of time kind of writing and, I don't know, getting all of my like ramblings down on a page, and Oliver's got the time and the energy to like build stuff. So it's quite a good combination that we have kind of as an operation.
Yeah, definitely. No, go ahead, Oliver. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We had artists that were mutual artist friends, because a lot of the early recordings, they were people who I would have introduced audio spaces to. They wouldn't have been familiar with sound or recording, or they might not even have used the voice memo app on their mobiles. But we, and throughout audio spaces, part of the fun has been introducing people who don't consider themselves sound people or artists to recording, and the journeys and the stories you hear from people who, where audio space is the first time they're exploring hitting record and listening with a little bit more intent,
Hmm.
and then also listening back to recordings of their past memories. That's been a lot of the fun,
Yeah.
and it's been fun to see so many people who, it's a little bit out there, I think, for some people, but even they've engaged with it and gone on this journey with it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'd say they were art. A lot of people are artists without realizing they're artists. Like, they're very
Hmm.
creative people who are familiar with kind of the worlds in an interesting way, but they're not like formally trained as artists, or they wouldn't class themselves as musicians or artists. So that is very interesting, that side of kind of what we've been doing.
I love the way that, Oliver, you were saying, perhaps with more intentionality, we might be able to engage with our surroundings, our environment in a different way, maybe in a way that we should, because we are bombarded with so much technology. and the news and social media especially, right? That we lose sense of place and space as well within our surroundings too. But I think that intentionality is something that now I have to share, where, you two come in into this relationship with my project, right? Um, it was also serendipitous, I think. I stumbled upon Audiospaces, the Substack, via Neil Spencer Bruce's sort of posts about how to do sound maps. And it was a very technical, post. And then through then, I wanted to figure out a way to do a sound map myself. Being a person that is more academic and less, programmy. And so what happened is that after I read Neil Spencer Bruce's page of the how to do that, I got so overwhelmed. And then I stumbled upon Audiospace and I said, man, I really should talk to Dylan. This person sounds very, knowledgeable about all of these things. He's doing exactly what I want to do because I had gotten a grant from one of the unis that I work for. And the whole project was essentially having field recordings of things that stir up memory, right? Because memory and sound transports you to the past, right? Which I think is something that is so important and so poetic as well. And so to be able to create an archive of these things, I thought would be very important within the context of New York City. And then hopefully building that into a wider context, worldwide, hopefully, of course. And both of you were so generous to help me out with this project, which is kind of, the whole reason why we're here in the first place, right? Um, but what I was going to ask is, how do you, I guess this is more a question for Dylan. What is the history of sound mapping? I don't know if you can give us not a complete rundown if you don't want, but just like a semblance of, what we're dealing with here. And then we can talk about like the technical aspect of it afterwards as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, the very basic idea, if people aren't aware of sound maps already, is in general, an online sound map is a map interface like Google Maps or Open Maps. We use Open Maps, and using different kinds of fairly simple tools, as Oliver said. You can record sounds and pin them to the map. So it's a representation of sounds in different places that you can then navigate and share and do things with. It's quite a simple idea, but it kind of emerges from this account. I'll caveat this account is a kind of slightly Eurocentric account, but it's the kind of conventional one. It sort of starts in the kind of mid 20th century where there's this in experimental music and kind of experimental sonic practices which were emerging in like New York and Vancouver and London and Paris, those kind of places. There was this quite strange cross-pollination with public education, with like public universities. So like in New York, there's the Fluxus movement with like John Cage, and they were doing stuff with community organizations while also being in this kind of art scene. But in Simon Fraser University, which is in Vancouver, a kind of circle of artists who were also public educators, like lecturers, but also I think also some of them were college, like high school and college teachers. They started being interested in combining composition with kind of new technologies like field recording, which were becoming more and more available, with kind of public education about the city. So like there's this kind of urbanist aspect to it as well. And from there emerged, so these are people like R. Murray Schafer, Barry Truax, Hildegard Westerkamp. They're quite big names now in like the kind of sound art scene. They kind of formed what's now understood as acoustic ecology. So it's sort of using artistic and creative like sound practices to make a kind of public intervention in this, usually in the city. So it's kind of educational and also sort of normative, trying to kind of make a difference in how people experience the space in sound. So kind of talking about and reflecting on acoustic spaces. So that kind of seeds, which combines like experimentation and musicality and composition with kind of really trying to like change the actual environment, like the kind of surroundings, has sort of found its way into like more 21st century kind of digital practices. So that the sound map kind of emerges. So there's all this new availability of being able to actually just make maps rather than just talk about or make music about spaces. You can actually represent it very easily in a kind of a very like wide scale where everyone has access to it, while then also and so experimenting, but also it being a kind of like public work that people can then contribute to and borrow and share from. And so like around the turn of the 21st century, like the early 2000s, you have things like, again in Canada, like the Montreal Sound Map is a very famous example. And then only a few years later, there is Radio Appareil, which is the most kind of famous one, which is very kind of sort of classic acoustic ecology, where they have these really long soundscape pieces, which can be like 20 minutes long. And they're supposed to be fairly kind of faithful, fairly accurate and high quality representations of spaces. And then they're pinned to maps. So then you can it's sort of like an archive with a map interface. But it's very one-to-one. It's supposed to be just like a sonic representation of the space that you access through a map. It's kind of very intuitive. And so that's the sort of prehistory of where we are now with like Audiospaces, and there's a lot of other examples which have sort of their own features. And I think sort of selfishly, the reason why I kind of repeat that story is because it also it's an easy way to explain why we think Audiospaces is something slightly different as well. It's like something we're trying to peel away from, which is that history of combining kind of sound experimentation with intervening in public space and education. One of the aspects of it is that it's supposed to be sort of objective in a sense. What you're recording is supposed to be an objective recording, and it's supposed to have a certain kind of quality standards. And I don't know if it was something very conscious at first between me and Oliver, but we decided that wasn't very interesting to us. Like, I mean, I guess there's already really good projects doing that, like Appareil. Cities and Memory also do that, where you have these really, really high quality, really nice sounding kind of wide stereo or 180 kind of soundscapes. And we were like, but there's so many people doing stuff with just their phones, just like a voice note and a camera, a phone's microphone. It's much better than it used to be, but it's not really designed to record like a kind of wide pan space. So like I think we're at a moment now where the technology is good enough that you can start to kind of like disarticulate that kind of that idea about what a sound map is. And that's where I guess that's where Audiospaces come in. We started to talk about it not being a sound map, but rather being like a cartophonic project. So it's using maps and sound for various different things. I mean, it's a slightly just like a semantic distinction, but it kind of shows that we're kind of trying to go beyond that kind of, we're recording objectively the soundscape. We're trying to take away the normative aspects of it. I think that's probably, is that a useful history?
Yes, of course. How did you come about the technical aspect of it, Oliver? I'm curious to know, like building or bridging these two, the intellectual, the academic, more the historical with the technical. I'm curious how your idea came about, right? In tandem with Dylan's, of course. And why did you decide to do the more technical aspect of it? I know you were doing it beforehand, right? I'm curious to know how this bridged together, I guess.
I think, there were a few, like I said, the idea behind Audiospaces is the product of, conversations I was having with people back in the UK, one person in particular. And Dylan described it as whether it was conscious, us building something that wasn't necessarily a sound mapping project, but rather something that was cartophonic. And all these words and this terminology has become it's become clear afterwards, having done some research and looked into other sound mapping projects and speaking to Dylan. I wasn't aware of sound maps, while I was having these initial discussions. And so it was conscious in the sense that it was ignorant of what existed before. And it was therefore very focused on memory and the stories behind the recording, and the recording almost just being a vehicle for for the memory that sits behind it. And maybe it was single-mindedness or so, but in learning about all these other maps and mapping projects, and I think in conversations with Dylan, we still both warmed towards something that was a little bit more subjective, encourage people to break the close one-to-one relationship between the space and the sounds that they can hear, and think about it in a slightly more abstract way, letting people play around with the space, the sound, the placement on the map, and so on. So it's, we were pretty set on that idea, and being set on that idea, the technical, it just felt like it had to be done. And thankfully YouTube exists, and this is before it's people, with the advent of AI and AI coding tools, this was done in a slightly clunkier way, in a more manual. I don't know what the right terminology for it is, but it felt a lot more manual than I think
human intelligence.
Human intelligence, yeah.
And it was just, it was YouTube and patience, and just being quite keen to get this off the ground. I'd had some experience building software before as well. I wasn't coming in as a complete beginner, but definitely learned on the job, learned while doing.
Excellent. So your project is more subjective in the sense that, you allow people to have that experience, that very personal experience with the spaces that, they are surrounded with, which is, I think, something that we need to do more of, honestly, be more intentional and be more aware. Awareness, I think, is the biggest thing, because as you record, because now I've started doing that in my own phone, as you record, you become a little bit more attuned, right, to all these different things around you, which we have, I think, for a large part forgotten, the sense of space and place at the same time. What I know we've talked a lot, Dylan, we've spoken via email about the different types of sound maps that have existed. So I was curious to know what are some of your favorites, and just seeing how maybe you took inspiration, both of you took inspiration from these other, pre-existing sound map projects, and yeah, how that, sort of fits into this whole project as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples to choose from. I mean, look, I'll go with Radio Appary as one example, which is just partly because I would recommend everyone going and having a look at Radio Appary, because the kind of web design is so 2007, 2008. I really like that style, and it's very kind of stripped back. And the sounds are magnificent as well. They're really, really nice. Quite varied as well. It's not just urban soundscapes, and it's not just kind of forest, kind of bio soundscapes. It's a kind of a mix. And they have a few different features which are really cool, where you can kind of layer the different, so they can be hour-long recordings from some really talented field recordists. And you can layer different ones, and so you can make this very kind of otherworldly kind of sonic experience, which is really nice. Appary's a really big inspiration just for listening as well. I think that was kind of a really formative thing for me when I discovered that. Another really good one is Echoes, which people might be familiar with. It's more of a kind of sound walk curation app. So you can make your own sound walks, and they've got their own kind of bespoke technology, which is sort of GPS triggered, which is really cool. But it exists in the kind of cartophonic space, where it's using maps and sound to create experiences and to explore kind of people's experiences of place and stuff like that. The final one I'll mention, and I'll hand over to Oliver as well, is the London Sound Survey. So a lot of these ones, we're talking about global sound maps, but the kind of local ones, which are very specifically kind of focused on a particular issue or a particular just place, like the heritage of a place, those are quite interesting. And the London Sound Survey is it's got some very strange, like, London's a weird place, and it kind of captures that very well. And the design, again, because it's very easy to kind of limit yourself to what Google gives you, the kind of Google Maps kind of smooth lines interface of Google. But the London Sound Survey, I think, again, because it's pre-2010, it's got this very kind of unique kind of grid system that it uses. That is at first a bit weird to kind of to try and navigate. But once you get into it, then it gives you, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about archives recently and how you organize an archive, and the fact that it's an archive organized in a grid system, which is just plonked on top of a picture of London. And there's something about Lister sitting there staring at a screen and then kind of navigating this square, and it kind of pops up in different ways. And it's a really, I thought it was a really interesting way of designing the interface. Oliver, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah,
any
I mean,
views.
it just reminds me of all, in the same way that we wanted to move away from this close tie between the objective sound and the space. There's definitely space to explore other ways, breaking down the concept of a map and all the connotations that come with a map and following paths and so on, and using, it's I think it might have been Neil Spencer Bruce who I spoke to recently and said, you got to think about other ways to represent what you have. So I think, we're at this point where the technology's there, the ability to build stuff is there, and we can start to have quite interesting conversations about other ways that we can represent, and like the example Dylan's just described, other ways that we can think about the map side of a sound mapping project or a cartophonic project.
I think we're very much tied to the idea of the map, and it's funny, I have a class where I talk a little bit about maps and how they're itself not objective, even though we try very hard to make them as objective as possible, right? Because it's for navigation, historically, and everything. But now how Google Maps has definitely changed our perspective quite literally of space and the world and Earth and location. It's much more handheld, obviously, but also it's completely detached ourselves from this cartographic, idea of the map itself, like the mappa mundi. But then to speak about creating these opportunities for people to bring their memories and build the archives themselves, right, of these spaces, I think is very powerful, because that definitely demands that we think about alternative ways of illustrating this, right? And perhaps this is a really good segue into seeing how your app actually looks like and what it works and how it works, rather.
Yeah, be happy to show you. So I'm going to skip through. So this is a sort of welcome. But we started in the UK. Can you see this clearly? Just to
Yeah.
be so so we started in the UK, and you can see, we haven't ventured far away from the concept of a map as yet. We're still very much in there. But it's a very simple interface in that, there's this global explore map that you can move around, you can zoom into specific areas, and you can play the recordings that you hear in those spaces. Some of those recordings, and this sort of comes back to the design, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but we restricted the ability to hear some recordings outside of, or we gave people the choice to restrict the ability for people to listen to only when they're in the location of the recording. So anyone could listen to a 30-second preview of a recording on the map, but to actually listen to it, to some of the recordings, you had to be in that location. And the idea was to create listening spaces as another sort of artistic tool for people, be it musicians who want to create listening spaces for songs, or people who really want to closely tie a memory to a location and make sure that anyone who's listening to it has the context of that place. And so that was something we explored. But broadly, there's this map that you can explore. The recording screen is very stripped back, and we try not to. That was definitely something that we did intentionally. We didn't want to guide people too much into recording particular sounds or or uploading particular recordings. We wanted to strip it back and let people record what they would record. And a lot of people we speak to, lots of the people that we have a large amount of recordings on Audiospaces still say that they think they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Oh.
They can't. They're not sure how they're meant to use it, and this is just how they like using it. So it leads to quite varied ways in which people use it, and that was definitely intentional because it was part of you know our interest in how people would relate to the sound. So then we have a discover page where you can play recordings of people that you follow, which introduces another idea of it being a slight social media, but really trying to remove a lot of the common features in social media, such as comments and so on. We wanted for the interactions to happen through sound more than other social media platforms might. And in the third slide here, you can see collections. And I'm just going to throw all these things out there. We can unpick them later if we want to, but collections are a tool for people, for organizations, or for people to build maps individually or collectively. And you can think of them almost as tags, where multiple people can contribute to the same map, and they can be themed. They can be around this particular event. You can see there was one here, which is 22 recordings around a wedding, capturing parts of the wedding that might not be in the wedding photographer's final album. So it's all these little use cases that we try and cater for, and here's back to the map. But this is broadly how we've set up the platform. And it's forever changing. We really encourage people to reach out and let us know what they're thinking, what they would like to see, and any concerns they might have. And it's still improving, especially the collection side. That's moving it into a platform that's useful for organizations and people with existing sound archives, but who might not necessarily know what to do with them.
Right. I think, no, go ahead, Dylan. Yep.
No, yeah, I think it's a couple of slides ahead. There's an image that shows kind of what a collection looks like in the platform. Is it this one? Yeah. So one of the things about the collections is that Ollie did mention is that it becomes its own map as well. So there's the wider public map, but then within that there's a kind of an infinite amount of maps that can be made according to different themes. And they're their own kind of small. If you think about an archive, you have lots of different collections, but it's a sort of like podcast like story version where you can have collections within collections, and you can have maps that can then be pinned to the wider map. So it's this sort of, you can kind of use the flexibility of the platform to then try and tell your own kind of story. And that's sort of, I guess that's what, when we're working with you and kind of trying to make a map for your project, it's your own collection, then it's your own sort of small archive that turns into a map, and that can relate to the wider map or to other maps in any way that you kind of are interested, you or your colleagues and your collaborators are interested in.
Yeah, I wanted to also highlight something you said, Oliver, which I found very interesting. And you said that some people did not think that they were using the app correctly. And I thought that was incredible, because I wonder what that tells us about our day-to-day lives and, our inability sometimes to not exist, but be immersed in our day-to-day. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts on that are. I love that, that they weren't sure how to use this properly. And you don't necessarily, like you said, give too much of an input into how they should use it, which I think is, the best thing you can do, right, for exploration and making it a personal sort of post or, pin in the map, on the map as well. But I wanted to know if you can speak more a little bit about that too.
I think it's still something that it's still something we think about
Mm-hmm.
a lot, because we're also conscious that as more people start to use the platform, that will like inevitably guide how future people think they should be using it, and how we manage that going forward. I'm not sure, but we obviously just, in simple terms, we want to encourage people to use it in as many different ways as possible. It really is, and we still stand by the idea of it being a simple tool that
Mm-hmm.
is designed for people to use how they would want to use it, um, and explore themselves and other people through sound. And that only happens, I think, when people really um, people almost use it slightly more instinctive.
Mm-hmm.
The recording practice. I was the works of Jonas with the sort of avant-garde film, and he spoke a lot about sort of being instinctive in his filming and his recording, and really not trying to make sure that he didn't impose himself on a particular situation, and really try to capture what was happening,
Mm-hmm.
and what he felt. And the more I think the more people will record and tune into their surroundings and listen, the more that they pick out the features that really matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that we are all different, and we all do all hear the world differently. And it's something that we're gonna remain. It's gonna remain a mystery.
Of
There
course.
is no there is no there is no answer, I'm afraid. But it's really about letting people follow their gut feelings and instincts, and recording what they feel uh, is the essence of a particular moment.
Mm-hmm. The fleeting moment, right?
Mm. Or
Um,
the moment that can be a longer moment, means it's like instant. But the beauty of recording is, and re-experiencing recorded memories, is that they are longer, and your mind goes on this journey
mm-hmm.
of sort of throughout the recording, and listening back to recordings or other people's recordings, or
Mm-hmm.
filling in those visual gaps, and I believe it strengthens our relationship with those memories.
Definitely. I guess one thing that keeps coming up for me is because this is a very personal, type of
Mm.
experience that one has with space and place and doing the recording. How
Mm.
does one build community then within the system? As in, how do we visualize that?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's so personal, how do we engage and understand and appreciate the community effort of putting all these sounds together on a map, essentially?
That's an interesting question. I mean, technically, I suppose the best feature is for that is the collections, because
Mm-hmm.
you can if you make your own collection, you can either choose it to be your own private one, so you get to control what gets added and who gets to see it, or it can just be a public one. So anyone that tags their uploads with that collection, it becomes part of it. So that's kind of in a kind of networked, very internety kind of way. That's community.
Mm.
Another way, one of the things that me and Oliver do is we listen to every single sound. So it's quite
Mm-hmm.
cool to see how it's just kind of grown and kind of expanded. And one thing that maybe I haven't thought about in terms that it's been a thing about community, but actually now you mention it, it feels quite community oriented. Is that in certain kind of hotspots of audio space usage, there does seem to be this kind of bouncing off each other. Like there is, I don't know, me and other even spoke about this. I don't know, but maybe you can give another opinion.
Yeah.
But for example, like in Barcelona, in the last maybe 6 months, Barcelona has become like a hub for audio space usage. And there's obviously this scene of people who are kind of musicians, but also they just sound like they're having a lot of fun. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're kind of responding, maybe not direct response, like an upload response to another one, because we don't have a function for that. But there's a kind of like a small scene going on
Mm.
within the platform, which is this kind of creatively, I don't know, there's a lot of echo, people doing things with echoes in there. Like, I don't know if there's like they're building foyer or something like that. And then also uploading songs, like their rehearsals of just them singing and playing the guitar. We don't know who they are, so I assume probably some of them are friends. But I also just think it's just people in Barcelona are kind of kind of creatively minded people in Barcelona are experimenting with the tool, and kind of that to me feels
Mm.
like a sort of community experience. I think Leeds in the UK is another city where a
Yeah,
lot
I
of that's
think
going on.
I was going to say you're doing a disservice to Leeds because they
Yeah,
were. It was early on, and before the app is better now, but in the early days it was a little clunkier. But people still, and so very weird, but people still use it, and especially there's a series or a group of recordings and people recording up in Leeds, a group of friends who, it's like an archive of a friendship as well, and them relating to a particular place and exploring the space. And we, from speaking to some of them, we know that they listen to each other's, and it was a way for them to sort of, yeah, experience for somebody else's memory, or what they had gone through, or where they were and how they related to that space. And yeah, just from speaking to them, partly as part of the research we did when we went to Seoul, that became quite clear that there was this community aspect that wasn't necessarily on the platform, but the platform became a vehicle for it.
What has
yeah.
been one of your favorite recordings that you've heard, that you've listened to? I have to ask that question.
Yeah, we should probably have preempted that question.
Yeah, I've never come up with a very. There are a couple of genres which I like, kind of things that have emerged. One of the trends, it sort of hasn't come up recently in the last few months, but for a bit, people were sort of I don't know if it would maybe in kind of pop culture, and I wasn't aware of it, but people were using it as a way of sort of complaining about something, kind of
Okay.
walking around, kind of complaining into their phone. Like there's one recording which I always think about where he's complaining about the price of food in the supermarket while he's in there. I think he's just like walking out the door and he's like, "Can you believe how expensive this stuff is?" Like, and I thought that was great. I mean, it's so not soundscape acoustic ecology. It's just like
Uh,
it's really like a different kind of approach to it, which I thought was cool. I really like the ones which are people talking into their phones, or
mm,
kind of not telling anyone and just turning, although it's a bit ethically dubious, but kind of just like they're sitting at the pub or they're doing something with their friends, and they're just pressing record, and I don't know, they're recording a friend who they think is funny, and it's just like
mm,
completely out of context, just them telling a story and just being
mm.
ridiculous. There's quite a lot of that,
Mm.
which I really like. Maybe because it's also a bit, you have to think about whether in the long term it's a good idea to allow that kind of thing to go on. But
Mm.
Oliver, do you have any favourites?
No, I struggle with this question, Dylan. He knows I struggle with this question. He put me on the spot anyway. Um, I I don't have a favorite. I like hearing recordings where each time I hear somebody using it in a slightly new way. That
Hmm.
that's
Like
what I really
complaining.
well, just like complaining, or when
We are
somebody's
English after all. Good complaining is part of our
it's
national
part of
identity.
it. Um, there's there are some people, and even people who've been recording for a long time. Some people have over 100 recordings on
Wow.
the platform, and that's 100 memories
Yeah.
that sonic memories that are on there. There's a rich library for them, but yet they're still exploring and using it in different ways. People play with titles to create sort of abstract, or lead listeners, sort of themselves re-experiencing the memory to lead the memory. And they're almost like little poems, or they paint these pictures with between the title, the sound, and the place. Um, and then you get more professional artists. Matt Eric Hart and his collection in Marseille is fantastic. But I really, yeah, I like hearing new things. I like hearing things that are unexpected, where it's almost certain that whoever was recording thought, what, I'm doing this in the wrong way, but I don't care, or like, somebody who felt like this is how they wanted to use it. The recordings where that comes out, I think that those are the ones I really like.
Right. Would you
Really vague
ever?
answer. I'm sorry about that, but I'll think about it. Maybe next time. Maybe
Of
next time we
course,
speak.
of course. Would you ever add a feature that would maybe map out, speaking of which, trends over time? I'm curious to know if that would be helpful, or maybe I'm thinking more from the perspective of data visualization, because it's
Mm,
become a really big thing of for archives and databases, etc., right? But I think it would be really interesting, not to give you more ideas or more work to do,
mm,
right? Um, but to see how throughout time different recordings change, or maybe they stay the same. Because you don't collect, people's demographic information, I assume. No,
mm.
right? No, it's anonymous, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, people can give their own information if they want, but there's no require.
Aha.
All you have to give is a phone number or an email, and that's
That's it,
So
yeah.
you can choose. Yeah, you can choose. And then yeah, there's a username.
Okay.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but then obviously, yeah, if you can choose to make your recordings private or public, but the public ones are pinned to a location, so that location becomes part of that user,
Mm-hmm.
that user name and so on.
Would you ever consider doing trend or visualizing trends? I think that would be really cool just to see over time what changes or what stays the same.
And this is changes within
Like a
what
space,
sort of.
or like,
yeah.
for example, Leeds or
Mm,
Barcelona, for instance. That'd be really, really
mm,
cool.
to see them sort of where recordings, a sort of timeline of where they've popped up.
Hmm.
Um,
Because
yeah,
I
this is,
imagine,
this is, I like that because it's so, this is, this is, we almost had like a year of, we have these recordings, and part of what we're thinking about going forward is, all these recordings are there. Um, how to represent them, or how could, how do people want to interact with a
hmm
sonic archive? How can we, if it's making it more engaging, or what are people interested in? And obviously without compromising what the platform's about, but just, and how do those ideas about how we present it, will they lead to us effectively imposing some sort of guides on how to
hmm
record and what we record? Um, Something like what you described, I don't think does. It's just a nice, fun feature, and we're all about fun features. Yeah, maybe that's what we'll do.
Fun feature. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the idea of thinking about trends will become more and more relevant as well as because the apps we've had
Mm,
it, we've been running for it's almost 3 years now, I think.
Okay.
mm,
So yeah, you can imagine somewhere like Leeds or Barcelona now, or there's a couple of places in the sort of northeast United States. I can't actually remember exactly which cities. They all sort of mix
mm,
into one for me sometimes. But there's a lot. There's been quite a lot of activity over 2 or 3 years, and it would be interesting to see if people's mood, even if it's just people's moods have changed. The
mm,
world has changed in the last few years.
Exactly.
Kind of the sounds that you can imagine in certain areas. There's lots of gentrification going on in British
mm.
cities all over the world. To kind of think about that would be quite interesting to really hone in on, even if the sonic profile has changed. I don't know how we would do that, but that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll nick that off you and
Of course. You can take it, of course.
yeah.
What was gonna ask? What would be your message for people interested in recording sound as like a nice takeaway for this episode? How do you attract people to partake in your app? What would you say to them who are interested but don't know how and are very reluctant but really have the desire to at the same time?
I'd say my main piece of advice is sort of the typical one you hear from any field recordist, which is just record.
Just
Just
record.
get, yeah, and that's what,
Mm,
again, to emphasize what Oliver said a couple of times. It's like
Hmm.
our platform is as easy as we make it as easy as possible. It's just you just open it and you press a button, and it doesn't
yeah.
matter. Anything else doesn't matter where you place it. That will come later,
Hmm.
depending on your
Mm,
taste. You're interested in sound, which everyone I think is to some extent. Just when you're out and about, just record stuff
Just
and see
Mm.
what
record.
it's like. Yeah,
Just do it.
just do it. Yeah,
Just
exactly.
do it.
It's funny. This wasn't even pre-planned, but that's sort of exactly the idea that came to mind. It's like just hit record and see what happens, and whether that encourages you to listen more while the recording is happening. But as well as hitting record, listen back to
Hmm.
stuff that you've recorded and see what that does in terms of transporting you back to the moment in which you were recording. Um, you don't even have to be, as Dylan said, out and about, or it doesn't have to be your first recording doesn't have to be a bird or something like this. You can just go out,
Complain.
or even at home, or you don't have to complain about food prices. You don't have to have anything to say. You know, it's it's a journey, and it starts by hitting record, and yeah, you'll see there's lots out there, and lots of stuff that we're very familiar with taking pictures,
Hmm.
but we're not so familiar with recording. And I think it lets us capture, the essence of what's happening in a different way. So yeah, I think I'd echo what Dylan's saying. Hit record and see what happens.
And see what happens. Awesome. Do you have any final thoughts before?
Yeah, I mean, I was curious because I was also listening to your last episode,
Hmm.
and I
Well,
thought there
with
was,
Paula, yeah.
yeah, well, no, was it the last one or was it the solo one that you did? There was a lot of crossover with um, with memory and archives,
Mm.
and I was just wondering how, what takeaways you had from that sort of relate to what we've discussed today.
That's a fantastic question for the interviewer. Yes, I think the one you're referring to is the embodied digital
Yeah,
archives,
that's
right?
one.
Yeah, so because I work in contemporary new media art, which is
Mm,
why I'm in the New Media Caucus in the first place, right? I was looking at how artists, especially artists of color, women, etc., have been thinking through archives in a very different way, more embodied, more movement based. And this, touching upon that, it made me think about my experience, which I've told Dylan and actually you also, Oliver, about when I went to Mexico City. And I heard what is her name? I'm trying to remember. La Fiera, no. It's the woman in the recording that asks you to buy mattresses and
Oh yeah.
mm,
metal and, if someone can do the voice, please.
Se compra colchones, tambores, refrigeradores, estufas, lavadoras, microondas o algo de fierro viejo que vendan.
Se vende colchones. Se
Ex-
compra. Man, yeah, I love it. It's so funny. Yeah.
But when I went there, I started thinking about not just movement as an embodied archive and practice, right? Which is what these artists are trying to do. And I'm an art historian, so I chronicle these, right? That's my job. But thinking and experiencing that for the first time while I was in like a hotel or wherever I was so different. And I had never heard anything like that before. And then I asked people in the community and just outside, what is that? And said, oh, yeah,
mm,
this is just something we grew up listening to. And then after that, that led me to, I think it was a podcast episode by this really great podcaster. I'm trying to remember their name, Roman Mars, I think his name is. And I think he was the one that did a special on that particular bit of history of Mexico. And I loved it so much because it had so much to do with, this young girl who was recorded. And then
mm,
now she hears back her recording, speaking of which, right?
mm,
And it made me that was the catalyst for me thinking about embodying and archives in a different way that was more sonic, right? More
mm,
sound based, which is why I, this has come full circle, which is why I contacted Dylan in the first place. And I said, I want to do a project that captures, the music, the sounds of nostalgia and
mm.
just the culture of people in New York City to start with. It's a very ambitious project.
Yeah,
But to start with New York City, because you have pockets of, for instance, like Chinatown. You have pockets where, you hear the all the different music. If you go to like Puerto Rico, like street, or
Mm.
they all have their different streets names as well. And so being able to record that and just have that as a memory, and I think that would be for me a way to experience community
Mm.
within communities as well, right? Little spaces become bigger spaces that form the matrix or the fabric, the
Mm.
sonic fabric of New York City. So that would be my
And that's
answer.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there's a really nice aspect of, when creating a recording, it's a lot like planting a seed,
of
from
course.
that recording then becomes part of other people's sonic memories,
Mm-hmm.
and can even become, a background to a new recording. And so you really, by creating a recording, you are starting like you're really just starting a seed, and from that you have no idea the
Mm-hmm.
sort of memories that will come from it, and how it
Definitely.
will refract sort of through other people's lives.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
This is why it's very exciting. And
Mm.
any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, well, a bit of a shout out to some of the people we've
Please,
like
yes.
been very lucky to kind of collaborate with. It's like sort of we haven't found a way to really thank some of the people that have kind of helped us. A lot of them are sound artists and stuff like. Well, and you can go and listen to their sounds on Audiospaces as well. There's Jo Scott, who's a really great sound artist. She moved to Coimbra in Portugal a few years ago. And I can't actually remember. I guess it was you, Oliver, got in contact with her and asked if she wanted to use it. She made these wonderful recordings, kind of becoming familiar with the rivers in her kind of near her town. And that was really nice to have this kind of. It was our first collaboration with someone where they made something for Audiospaces.
Mm.
And then Matt Eric Hart as well, who's kind of a big friend of the project now. He's got a really good Substack called Sonic Tapestries.
Oh yeah, I've followed that one.
Yeah. He's really good. He's a really talented recordist, but also a really good writer as well. But he's been really kind of supportive for quite a long time. Pete Stollery as well, who's also a very kind of respected sound artist who's been very, very kind to us in kind of many moments. And Sam Zeman, who I've never spoken to, but he's uploaded some really, really good recordings, which beyond our emphasis really is people who aren't artists. Anyone who's interested in kind of exploring sounds, we're kind of here for you as well. But we're really sort of honoured to have people from the sound art world and people like you, Constanza, as well, who are interested in what we're doing, because we're not really. I know I come from academia in a sense, but I don't feel like I'm from a kind of an institutional background. We're really just like two mates who have a bit of time and interest. So it's really nice to kind of have support from the wider community. Yeah.
And then all the people who continue to add to it and tell us ways in which it can improve. It has really been a long journey, nearly 3 years, you said, but it's really been made by all those people as well, so thanks.
Thank you. All right, so this is our episode for today. Thank you so much to Dylan and Oliver for joining us, and you can download the app on the Android store and also the Apple store as well, right? And it's also a web app, I believe, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So you have options, of course. And as they said, just record and let's see what happens, right? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Constanza.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.